I'm Stephanie Rozzo. Welcome to Nature Sketch Create's step-by-step Bermuda Buttercup instructional video. In this video, I'll be showing you how to paint the Bermuda Buttercup by using Nature Sketch Create's step-by-step painting instructions. Help this tiny business by clicking that like button, subscribing to this YouTube channel, and shopping for crates at naturesketchcreate.com. First, collect all your materials and make sure they're ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Take your time, relax, and don't worry too much if you think you might have made a mistake. Let's get started. Step 1, transfer the image to the watercolor paper. So you want to tape your image to the back of the watercolor paper. It doesn't have to be perfectly lined up, just as long as anything you want to transfer is over that watercolor paper. So if you want to transfer the common name and scientific name or the hole punch lines, just make sure you line those up properly. Then take your graphite transfer paper, dark side down, light side up. Place it on top of your watercolor paper under your transfer paper. And you'll just want to make sure it is under anything you end up wanting to transfer. You can transfer the image by just tracing right over the lines. And you'll want to use about a medium pressure. And you want to be able to see the lines after you're done painting, so you can redraw them at the end. So go ahead and transfer a few and then flip up the image and the transfer paper to make sure that they're transferring, so you have your graphite transfer paper the right way and it's transferring dark enough. And then just go ahead and trace over all of the lines to transfer them. And you may want to use a colored fine tip pencil or pen to keep track of which lines you've already transferred. And you don't need to be exact. This is just a sketch, just a representation of this plant, not an exact copy. Put on a podcast or maybe an audio book or just listen to nature. This is meant to be a relaxing exercise. So pick something in the background that's going to be relaxing for you. And just go ahead and go throughout and trace all over all of the lines to transfer them. Once you think you have all the lines transferred, go ahead and hold down one part of your image and flip the paper up and down like a flip book and move your eye from one spot to the other to check to see that you've transferred all of the lines. I always end up missing something. And you can just add those in right now. And if you end up missing something still after this step, you can always add it in later or omit it altogether. Don't forget to add the hole punch lines if you want to add those, and transfer the common name and the scientific name if you want to do that. The best way to transfer the common name I found is to just outline the inner parts, so drawing on the black still of the common name to transfer it, as my pencil tip is a little smaller than the text itself. And to transfer the scientific name, you can just draw right over that like you did when you were transferring the lines of the plant. When you're all done, go ahead and remove the graphite transfer paper. This can be used over and over and over, so make sure to save it and reuse it. Remove the transfer image from the back of the watercolor paper. And you can leave the tape here, but I often find I can reuse it, so I go ahead and remove that and set it aside for future use if it doesn't have too much paper or anything pulled up on the tape itself. And then I save the transfer image. Sometimes I like to use it to protect my painting while I'm creating it from my hand from any smudges. So that's up to you. Also can be helpful if you're mixing paint too close to prevent paint spatters if you don't want those. So save that for future use as well. Take your kneaded eraser and knead it to a light gray spot. A light gray spot, and then use it to lighten any marks by just dabbing over them if you need to lighten the marks, or erase any smudges left behind from your graphite transfer paper or anything else by just kind of rubbing it over. And just make sure it's a light gray spot so you don't leave any extra smudges on your paper from the kneaded eraser. And now I'm ready to move on to step 2. Step 2, paint in the Buttercup yellow. So take the 1H Hansa yellow light, make sure to shake it up. Sometimes the paint pigment settles on the side or the bottoms. You want that mixed in so you get the full vibrance of the color. And add it to your palette, 1, 2. I'm adding 2 drops just so I have a little bit more to work with. And you can add a little bit of water when you're mixing it by squeezing the barrel of your water brush, or by picking up a little bit of water from your vessel if you're using a regular paintbrush. So we're going to use the wettest, lightest version of this color. That's the wettest, lightest in our palette. So it's going to have the most water added to it in our palette, making it appear light when we use it to paint. Dab it off onto my towel and then test it on my paper to see if that's light enough, or make sure it's not too light. There's a little bit of fuzz in my palette there, so I picked it up and wiped it off on my towel. I'm going to pick up a little bit more, dab it off onto my towel, and just apply it to the entire plant. And I'm going to add this like I would when I'm using maybe like a marker or crayon, just filling in the space. And I'll pick up more paint whenever I need it, dab it off on my towel. And if my tip isn't fine enough, if it's a little too wide, you just kind of roll it on your towel. So go ahead and go throughout and add the paint. When you're done, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and move on to step 3. Step 3, paint in the Buttercup green. So make sure this is dry before you get started, and you can test that by just kind of dabbing your finger on top of the painting, and then you can see that it's dry. Make sure not to rub your hand across it while it's wet, while you're testing to see that it's dry, so you might smear your paints. So you want to mix the Buttercup green and take 1 drop of the 16H Cobalt Blue and shake that again to make sure it's well mixed. One drop of the 19H Burnt Sienna, and 12 drops of the 1H Hansa Yellow Light. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Mix that up and add a little bit of water from your brush into your palette so that it moves a little bit. And when mixing it, make sure you mix it away from your other color. If they end up blending, it's okay, but it's easier if it doesn't. Dab it off onto your towel and test it out on your paper. compare that to the color on your step-by-step. Looks good to me. And we're going to use the wettest, lightest. Again, that's going to be the color with the most water added to it in our palette, making it appear very light when we use it to paint. So we're going to add a bunch of water here and test it out to see if it's the right concentration of color and water. It looks a little light, so I'm going to add a little bit more. And then here you can see it touch, so it's kind of bleeding over. So I might have to move it a little bit further. Or even start a new little spot for this. Let's see how it goes. That looks like the right color. And dab it off onto my towel after picking some more up. And then just add it to these leaves. The same way we did with adding the color to the painting before in step 2. Just kind of filling it in like we would with a marker to all of these leaves, stems, and the calyxes. And pick up paint whenever you need it, whenever you run low, whenever the pigment starts getting lighter or too light. Just make sure to dab it off onto your towel before applying to your paint so you can control the paint a little bit better. And so your paper doesn't buckle from having too much water on it. When you're done, go ahead and clean off your brush and let this dry and move on to step 4. Step 4, paint in the Buttercup yellow. So we're going to use the fully concentrated Buttercup yellow color, and you can test to make sure you have a very vibrant, fully concentrated color that moves well on your paper. And pick some up, dab it off onto your towel, and go ahead and apply it. And you don't necessarily have to wait for the green to dry, but it might help so you can prevent some smudging or any possible accidents with your hand while you're painting the yellow part in. But we're just going to go ahead and add it, and you can refer to step 4's image or the larger final reference image for placement. And this is going to add some contrasting areas, so the lighter areas are different and helps your image to pop a bit more. If your color is not bright enough, you can definitely add more fresh Ponce yellow light if you need to. When you're adding this, just make sure you preserve some of the lighter color underneath to help create that contrast and really have some shape and form to this flower, making it look more realistic even though it just has a few layers of paint. You're all done. Go ahead and clean off your brush. Let this dry and move on to step 5. Step 5, paint in the Buttercup green. So we're going to use a darker, drier, or more concentrated color. And we're not going to use the super fully concentrated color. It's a little too dark, but we can use something that's a little bit less. So take a little bit of that paint to the side, add just a tiny bit of water to it, and test it out to make sure that's the right concentration. I think that looks pretty good to me. It's not super dark and not super light, maybe a little bit more. Try it one more time. Looks pretty good. And you can decide which one you want to use. So that's the fully concentrated. This is kind of a little bit lighter with a little bit more water added to it. Dab it off onto your towel. I'm just going to add it like you see in step 5 to the leaves, the stems, and the calyxes again. And I'm going to avoid kind of these little center stripes. So this area right here and these here on the leaves. And I'm not going to add any to this part or this part either. But I'm going to add a little stripe here. It doesn't have to be perfect. You should place it whatever way you want. It's just a sketch, and it should be unique to you. So go ahead and add that in. Again, referring to your final reference image and step 5's image. And don't worry if you get paint in those lines anyway. This is meant to be perfectly imperfect. It's just a sketch, going to be beautiful no matter how you end up painting it. When you have all the green added, go ahead and clean off your brush, let this dry, and move on to step 6. Step 6, paint in the Buttercup orange, red, and green. So first go ahead and mix the Buttercup orange. Take 2 drops of the 1H Hansa Yellow Light, 1, 2, and 1 drop of the 26H Chrome Yellow, go ahead and mix that up, adding just a little bit of water to your palette from your brush or your vessel, and test it out. Looks like the right color to me. I'm going to paint the anthers and the stigma. And then I'll clean off my brush and mix the Buttercup red. We'll take 1 drop of the 29H Crimson Lake, and 1 drop of the 19H Burnt Sienna, go ahead and mix that up, adding just a little bit of water so that it moves around without getting caught on the paper. Test that out. Looks good. Now I'm going to pick up some more and then just roll my brush so I get that little fine tip. And then I'm going to add it to the leaves. Again, making sure it's dry, kind of dabbing your finger over it. And I'm just going to add it to the spots that I transferred. And you don't have to add this in exactly the same place. The spots do tend to go towards this center area here in direction. So that's one thing you just want to keep that in mind. You don't have to be the right size, or the right amount. You can add more or less. You can be creative and have fun with this one. And when you're done, dab your brush onto your towel a little bit if you have too much paint on there, and then just kind of add a little bit to the center of those leaves too. And then clean off your brush. I'm going to use the wettest, lightest Buttercup green. I'm going to double check that it's still wet and light, the right concentration. Maybe a little bit more. Go. Maybe a little bit less. Sometimes even adding the right amount of water can be a little bit of a trial and error. And that's why you always test it out on your paper first. And pick up some, dab it on my towel. I'm just going to add it to this right bud here just a little bit. Adding it to the top part of the center of the flower around the stigma and the anthers. And go ahead and clean off my brush. Let this dry and move on to step 7. Step 7, add ink lines. And you'll want this to be dry before you do that. So you can test it out by just kind of dabbing your finger over it. Take the 005 black micron, the smallest tipped micron, and use it to, you can re-outline the common name if you want, or you can wait and do that with the larger 01 micron and redraw the scientific name as well. And then use it to redraw the lines transferred during step 1, except for the dots on the leaves. So you can just go throughout and you can refer to your final reference image for placement or your transfer image as well, or 7A. And again, this should be relaxing, so go ahead and put on a podcast or some music or listen to nature, whatever relaxes you while you're doing this. Just take your time, relax, and draw the lines. Feel free to redefine the lines as well, depending on where the paint landed. So if the paint landed outside the original lines and you want that to be on the inside, just draw that line outside of the paint. And vice versa as well. So if your paint landed on too far on the inside and you want to redefine that so that it lands on the outside, that's fine too. And just feel free to redefine those lines. Next, use the 01 micron to write the scientific name, to thicken the bud lines, to thicken the lines of the leaves and the stems, and to add some thicker lines throughout the flowers. And you can refer to 7A and your final reference image for that placement. And don't worry about being exact. This is your sketch. Just make it your own. If there's a place you want to add a thicker line, go for it. Lastly, use the 08 black micron, the thickest of the three, to add some thicker lines throughout and to fill in the common name. And you can refer again to your final reference image and 7B for placement. And also be careful, this does leave enough ink on the paper that if you run your fingers or your hands over it, it will smudge and leave smudge marks. If that's something you want, then go ahead and do it, but if you don't, then just be careful to wait till it dries. We're done. Great job, and keep practicing. If you like, you can always add more ink or more paint to your painting. And as an example, I'm going to go and show you something that's not on your step-by-step. We're going to add a little bit more paint to these flowers. I'm going to take this wettest, lightest version of the Buttercup orange. I'm just going to add a little bit more contrast to the flowers. I'm going to clean off my brush on my towel and test it out on my watercolor paper. It looks really wet and light, so I'm going to add a little bit more. So I have a little more pigment to that, so it shows up a little bit more. Looks pretty good. And then I'm going to clean off my brush, and I'm going to show you a technique that I don't usually use, adding some wet spots to your painting with a clean wet brush, and then just taking some of that paint and painting right over it, and it'll flow into those spaces, and that'll add a little bit of a dark color. Alternatively, you can just add some of that paint to those spaces, clean off your brush, and then just kind of move it a little bit to let it cover that color. So you can use either technique as long as the paint is dry. And this will only go into the wet areas, and you don't want too much water added to it or it will cause your paintboard to buckle. So just a little bit, so just that clean damp brush in those areas, and then pick up some paint, dab it on your towel, and then add in a little bit of paint. And the paint will only go to the wet areas. It'll stay out of the dry areas. So wherever you added that clean wet brush, that's where the paint will go. Just adding, and again, just not being real exact, just kind of in these darker areas. Add another level of contrast, even though this flower is just a very yellow flower, it doesn't have a lot of orange to it. But if you'd like to add a little bit more paint, another level of contrast, you can do this very low concentrated color, just kind of add it through if you like. And it's best with watercolor to start light and keep working with just a little bit at a time. You don't want to do anything too drastic because you can't go backwards. So you can continue to make the leaves on here a little bit darker, or the stems darker, or add more yellow if you want the leaves to be brighter, or more orange to make them a little more contrast in those shadowy areas. This is your painting, and you can do what you want to do with it and make it unique to you. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had fun, had a chance to relax a little. You have created a unique painting that only you can do. Next, you have a few options what to do with this painting. You punch holes in it, add it to your sketchbook, frame it, gift it, send it in the mail as a postcard to brighten someone's day. Also, make sure to share it on our Facebook fan art page and use the hashtag #NatureCreateArt to have it featured on your social media. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Let me know if there's any plant or animal that you'd like to see for a future lesson as well. Again, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this YouTube channel, and check out naturesketchcreate.com to shop for future crates and to sign up for updates for future lessons.